Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're exploring something I think many of you, our listeners, are really fascinated by.
Absolutely. That place where ancient faith meets hard physical evidence. It's often a pretty volatile mix.
Yeah, and sometimes thrilling, too. We're talking about belief systems moving from just ideas in a book to actual things, tangible objects.
Exactly. And for centuries, people haven't just read the Bible. They've poured fortunes, sometimes their whole lives, into proving the things described are real, still out there.
Waiting to be found. So, our mission today is a deep dive into three of the most, famous and persistent biblical quests.
We're talking about a really crucial relic from the crucifixion itself.
A mythical ship that supposedly saved humanity from a flood.
And, of course, a fabled source of almost unimaginable wealth.
We're tracking the journeys, sometimes incredible, sometimes tragic, of historians, even astronauts, adventurers.
All totally dedicated, often still are, to proving the Bible is true. Historically, geographically, physically true.
And the sources we're drawing on are pretty diverse, aren't they?
Oh, definitely. We've got everything from meticulous historical archives, centuries-old explorers' journals,
right up to modern science carbon dating results, high-tech archaeology reports.
And yeah, they often conflict. The picture you get is rarely simple. It's complex, often contradictory, but always fascinating.
That's the core tension, isn't it? What actually happens when really deep driving belief?
The kind of belief that makes someone climb a deadly mountain or spend decades sifting through dust.
What happens when that meets scientific scrutiny, meets reproducible, unbiased data?
That's where we'll navigate. We'll look closely at the paper trails, the hard science, sometimes the sheer audacity behind these quests.
For the true cross, for Noah's Ark, and for King Solomon's mines.
It's quite a journey.
Okay, let's unpack this, and maybe we should start small, relatively.
Small, but incredibly significant.
Yeah, with perhaps the most sensitive relic imagined, a small piece of wood, revered for centuries.
Claimed to be the actual sign placed above Christ's head during the crucifixion.
We're talking about the quest to authenticate the Titulus Crucis.
Right. The Titulus Crucis, it literally means the title of the cross.
And this object, it's a fragment of wood. Where is it?
It's preserved in Rome, in the Basilica di Santa Croce. It's not huge, maybe 25 by 14 centimeters.
But for believers, this isn't just any old piece of wood.
Not at all. It's potentially the most significant surviving artifact connected directly to the crucifixion, an eyewitness object.
The stakes, then, are just astronomical if this thing is real.
It could be the oldest written record we have that specifically mentions Jesus Christ from the event itself.
And that possibility drove one historian in particular, didn't it? Michael Hesterman.
He dedicated, 15 years of his life trying to prove its authenticity.
Trying to bridge that huge gap in time between the relic we see today and the actual.
He called it a silent witness.
Mm-hmm.
His first step, methodologically, was establishing historical plausibility.
Did the Romans even put signs on crosses?
Contemporary Roman sources say yes. Crucifixion was common, sadly. And posting a notice, the titulus, listing the condemned's name and crime, that was standard practice.
Okay, so the practice itself checks out, and the Bible gives specifics here.
The Gospel of John does. It says the inscription read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews.
And crucially, in 3 languages, right? Hebrew, Greek, and Latin.
Exactly. That multilingual aspect is key for this specific relic.
Why is that so important for Hesterman?
Because unlike just a random piece of wood from a cross, which could be anything,
the text connects it directly to the event described in the gospel.
Precisely. That written link is everything for his argument.
So to track this link, we need to go way back, 1700 years back.
To the 4th century AD, the time of Emperor Constantine.
Right. What was happening then? Why the sudden interest in relics?
Well, Constantine's running this enormous, incredibly diverse Roman Empire. Very hard to manage.
He needs glue, basically, something to unify everyone.
And he chooses Christianity. But for a population used to tangible gods, statues, sacred places, just belief wasn't enough.
He needed symbols people could see, touch, venerate. He needed relics, powerful ones.
So he dispatches the ultimate relic, his own mother.
Empress Helene, who was, around 70 years old at the time?
Yeah, around 70. And she undertakes this epic journey over 700 miles to the Holy Land, around AD 325.
That's incredible for anyone back then, let alone someone her age. Shows how important this was.
Absolutely. The scale of the expedition speaks volumes. She gets to Jerusalem, focuses on the traditional site of the crucifixion.
Which, ironically, was covered up by then.
Yeah, by a Roman temple to Venus, of all things.
So Helena orders it torn down, and they start digging.
The story goes they find 3 crosses, which makes sense. Crucifixion in groups happen.
But the big question, how do you identify which one belonged to Christ?
According to the tradition, the Titulus Crucis itself provided the answer. It was supposedly still attached to one of the crosses.
The sign. Still physically connected after all that time.
That's the claim. The trilingual inscription was the key identifier. separating Christ's cross from the other.
Okay, but how reliable are those accounts? Is this something people made up later, or do we have contemporary sources?
The corroboration is surprisingly strong, actually, and it's the bedrock of Hesserman's historical case.
Who mentions it?
Major church figures from that generation, people like Ambrose of Milan, John Chrysostom, they wrote shortly after Helena's return.
And they mention the Titulus specifically.
Both of them do. They mention finding the true cross, and they explicitly cite the Titulus as the undeniable proof of authenticity.
So for Hesserman, this 4th century narrative isn't just legend.
No, he views it as pretty solid historical fact.
But then things get murky. This is where the 1,000-year gap comes in, right? Helena didn't leave all the relics in Jerusalem.
No, she divided them up, which was standard practice for really important relics. Spread the favor, the power.
Where did the pieces go?
Some crosswood and nails went back to Constantinople with her. Some stayed in Jerusalem.
And crucially for our story, 3 major relics came back to Rome, to her private palace.
Right. A fragment of the true cross, one of the males,
Right.
and critically, part of the Titulus Crucis. Accounts say she simply chopped the original sign into pieces.
She split the sign itself.
Seems so.
Yeah.
And brought a significant piece back to Rome.
Okay, so it's in her palace chapel in Rome, but then the trail goes cold for centuries.
Very cold. After Helena died, the palace, including the chapel with the relics, was eventually given to the Pope, Sylvester to the March.
And the Basilica of Santa Croce was built over it.
Exactly. So everyone knew the relics were somewhere within the basilica structure, part of its foundation, but the exact spot, lost to time and records.
Until the late 15th century, 1492 of all years.
Right. During major renovations on the basilica, they were doing ceiling repairs, specifically in the area thought to be Helena's original chapel.
Workmen up there fixing mosaics.
And some tiles fall away. Behind them, they find a brick.
Just a random brick?
Not quite. It had an inscript, Titulus Crucis.
Wow, a literal sign.
And behind that brick, they found a sealed wooden box.
Sealed? How?
With the wax seal of a cardinal, later dated to the 12th century.
And inside the box
Was the wooden fragment, with the writing in 3 languages. The very piece Hesserman studied centuries later.
an incredible rediscovery, sealed away for maybe 300, 400 years inside.
Absolutely astonishing.
Now, Hesserman uses this period of being hidden. This is a key part of his argument for authenticity, isn't it? Which sounds backward.
It does seem counterintuitive. Why would hiding something make it more likely to be real?
Yeah, wouldn't a forger want it out there drawing pilgrims?
Exactly Hesserman's point. His reasoning is purely practical, thinking about the medieval economy of faith. Relics meant pilgrims. Pilgrims meant donations, wealth, prestige for the church.
So why hide it?
Why would anyone in the 12th century go to the immense trouble of creating such a complex, detailed fake, getting the wood, the chalk, the 3 languages right, only to immediately brick it up behind a wall?
Denying the church all that potential revenue for centuries.
Right. It makes no economic sense if it's a forgery designed to fool people in the 12th century or later.
So for Hesserman, the act of hiding it, sealing it away,
Suggests profound reverence, a desperate need to protect something incredibly sacred during unstable times, rather than a cynical plot to create a fake and then just not use it.
that does put a different spin on it. The hiding becomes evidence against forgery.
For him, yes. The hiding, the seal, point to its perceived sanctity back then, not its creation as a fraud.
Okay, let's move from the history to the object itself. The physical evidence Hesserman examined, what did he find?
Well, physically it tells a story. The Rome fragment is clearly the right-hand side of a larger original.
You can tell.
Oh yeah. The left edge has a very deliberate, clean cut, not a break, a cut.
Which fits perfectly with.
The 4th century accounts of Helena dividing the original Titulus, chopping it up.
What about how it was made? The writing.
Very interesting details there. The writing direction, crucially, is right to left overall.
Which suggests
A scribe native to the region, likely Jerusalem, not a Roman or European forger working centuries later, who'd likely default to left to right, especially for the Latin and Greek.
and the material.
Also period appropriate. It's black ink on a prepared surface of white chalk or gesso over the wood. That was a common style for Roman writing tablets, tabulae, used in Palestine back in the 1st century.
Okay, but the big question, survival. Can a piece of wood actually last for 2,000?
That's a major hurdle, obviously. Hesserman tackled it directly.
How?
He pointed to the likely conditions where the crosses were supposedly found deep underground, maybe in an old, disused cistern.
What kind of environment?
Likely very stable, low oxygen, dry. That kind of anaerobic environment drastically slows down decay.
Are there other examples of wood surviving that long?
Absolutely. He cited the Vindelander tablets found in Roman Britain. Thin, delicate wooden letters and documents, nearly 2,000 years old, preserved in similar low oxygen conditions.
So physically, the wood surviving isn't impossible. It's plausible.
Plausible, yes. Difficult, but not impossible, given the right environment.
Now, this is where, for me, Hesselmann's argument gets really fascinating. He uses the apparent errors in the text as his strongest proof.
This is the core of his paleographic, his handwriting-based art. And yeah, it's counterintuitive.
What are these errors?
Two main things. First, the order of the languages on the relic fragment is Hebrew first, then Greek, then Latin.
How does that differ from the Bible?
Both Luke and John mention the three languages, but they give slightly different orders in their accounts. Neither matches the relic exactly.
Okay, that's one difference. What's the other?
Specific spelling variations. For example, in the Latin part, Nazareth is spelled with an I-O Nazarenus rather than the more standard minor, things like that.
So why would mistakes prove it's real? If I were forging something in the 12th century...
You'd copy the Bible perfectly, wouldn't you? You'd use the established sacred text as your template. You wouldn't introduce variations.
Right. You wouldn't risk making mistakes that people could point to as proof it's a fake.
Exactly Hesselmann's point. He argues these freedoms, these minor inconsistencies in spelling quirk, are actually proof of authenticity because they suggest a spontaneous, real-time creation. Picture a Roman soldier or scribe, maybe tired, maybe working quickly, maybe not a scholar, writing out the sign on the spot in AD 30. They wouldn't necessarily be referencing a perfect scriptural text.
They'd just write what they were told, maybe making small errors or using common local spellings.
Precisely. Whereas a careful medieval forger working centuries later with theological reverence, they'd be meticulous. They'd never risk such obvious deviations from the gospel accounts.
So the imperfections make it more likely to be a rushed, authentic first-century creation, not a careful later.
That's his argument. The flaws are signs of its spontaneous reality.
Okay, that's a compelling case built on history, physical plausibility, and these textual quirks. But then hard science comes knocking.
Yes, 2002, radiocarbon dating. The University of Rome took 6 tiny samples from the back of the fragment.
They must have gone into that expecting, or at least hoping for, a first-century date.
Reports suggest the scientific team was open to that possibility.
But the result, it was pretty definitive, wasn't it?
Devastatingly so for the authenticity claim. The C14 dating placed the wood's origin firmly between AD 890 and 1150.
Smack bang in the Middle Ages, almost a millennium after the crucifixion.
Right, squarely in the medieval period, not even close to the first century.
So, the scientific conclusion from the C14 test is
that the Titulus Crucis is highly likely a medieval creation, a forgery, or perhaps a devotional copy made much later.
But Hesselmann and the relic supporters didn't just accept that, did they?
Not at all. They vehemently rejected the C14 results. Their main counterargument was contamination.
This sounds familiar. Takes us back to the controversies around dating the Turin Shroud, right?
Exactly the same principle. The argument is that ancient organic material, especially porous wood, can absorb newer carbon over centuries of exposure.
Exposure to what?
Candles burning nearby in the church, incense smoke, human handling, breath, oil, maybe even repairs or treatments applied over the century, and especially fire damp, which was a factor for the shroud.
So how does this contamination affect the date?
Carbon dating measures the ratio of unstable carbon-14 to stable carbon-12. C14 decays over time. Less C14 means older material.
Okay.
If newer carbon, say, from 15th century candle soot, gets embedded into the ancient wood.
It mixes with the original carbon.
Right. You get a composite sample.
Yeah.
When you test that sample, the presence of the newer carbon artificially increases the C14 ratio,
making the object appear younger than it was.
Exactly. Hesselmann argued this contamination could easily be enough to skew the results by century, pushing a genuine first-century date into the medieval period reported by the lab.
Now, the C14 labs would argue they account for this, right? With chemical
They do. They use acid and alkali bath, specifically designed to remove surface contaminants before testing the core material. They are very confident in their methods.
But Hesselmann wasn't convinced. He offered an alternative scientific approach.
Yeah. He essentially said, okay, maybe the wood chemistry is debatable, but the writing style isn't affected by soot. He turned to comparative paleography.
Handwriting analysis, basically.
A very specialized form of it. He sent high-resolution photos of the inscription of the Hebrew, Greek, and Latin parts to 7 leading international experts in ancient scripts.
Including people who work on the Dead Sea Scrolls. Why them specifically?
Because those scholars are absolute masters of dating the subtle changes in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin letter forms used specifically in Palestine through the 1st century BC and 1st century AD.
They look for tiny details, how a letter curves, pen angles.
Exactly. The specific ductus, the way characters were formed. These styles changed relatively quickly, almost like fonts evolving. An expert can often date the script style to within a few decades.
And what did these 7 independent handwriting experts conclude about the Titulus inscription?
Unanimously, all 7 dated the writing style itself, the letter forms, the way they were written to the 1st century AD.
Wow, directly contradicting the C14 date for the wood.
Completely. So for Hesselmann, this was the trump card, the definitive, uncontaminated proof.
His argument being
That even if the C14 dating had issues, no medieval forger, however skilled, could have possibly known enough about first-century Palestinian paleography to perfectly replicate those nuanced, specific ancient writing style. That level of knowledge simply didn't exist until modern scholarship.
So we're left perfectly suspended. It's a fascinating deadlock.
It really is. On one hand, you have the physics of radioactive decay dating the wood to the Middle Ages.
On the other, you have expert analysis dating the writing on the wood to the time of Christ.
And your conclusion entirely depends on which branch of science, which methodology you find more compelling or less susceptible to error in this specific case.
It's the perfect illustration of that core tension we talked about. Belief, history, and competing scientific truths all colliding over one small piece of wood.
Powerful start.
Indeed. And from this tiny, disputed fragment, let's make a huge leap. We're going from a micro-relic to a truly monumental quest.
A quest for physical proof of a world-altering event.
The search for Noah's Ark on the formidable Mount Ararat.
Yeah, the Ark search brings a whole different scale and dynamic. We're not looking for something hidden in a church wall.
No, this is supposedly a colossal ship, the vessel that saved humanity, hidden somewhere on one of the most dangerous mountains on Earth.
And perhaps the most famous Ark hunter, certainly in the modern era, wasn't a historian or archaeologist. He was an astronaut.
Colonel Jim Irwin, Apollo 15 pilot, 8th man to walk on the moon, brought back the Genesis rock. His story is incredible.
It really is. His shift from NASA hero to essentially a full-time creationist evangelist is quite something.
What triggered it? Was there a specific moment?
There was. During the Apollo 15 mission in 1971, they had a critical failure. The steering on the lunar rover broke down.
Stranding them, potentially? That's terrifying.
Hugely risky. Irwin, who had some religious background, prayed intensely that night. The next morning, against all odds and engineering logic, the steering just worked.
Wow. He saw that as direct divine intervention.
Absolutely. That moment utterly convinced him of God's active presence and power. When he got back to Earth, he felt he had a new mission.
Retired from NASA, founded his high flight ministry,
and became completely convinced that the Bible, including Genesis, was literally historically true, down to the last cubit measure.
So finding Noah's Ark became his post-NASA calling.
His ultimate mission. Starting in the 1980s, he poured his energy in. For Irwin, this wasn't just finding an old boat.
No, for him it was.
The ultimate proof. Proof of God's existence, God's judgment, the Bible's complete accuracy, everything.
And the location, the Bible says the mountains of Ararat, which usually points to one specific massive volcano, eastern
Mount Ararat itself. And it's a monster, a vast stratovolcano, 380 square miles, over 16,000 feet high.
Constantly covered in snow and shifting glaciers, volcanic rock fields, notoriously hostile weather.
Locals apparently call it the Mountain of Pain. It's earned that reputation.
So Irwin launches expeditions into this, starting in 1982.
Yes, and they immediately encountered both the symbolic and the brutal reality.
It's symbolic.
On the very first morning of their first expedition, they saw this enormous, perfect rainbow over the mountain. They took it as a divine sign, God's blessing on their quest.
Like the covenant sign after the flood itself. But the reality...
The reality was grueling, dangerous, and ultimately fruitless. Days of searching the ice fields, the canyons, they found absolutely nothing resembling an ark.
And this is where Irwin's intense faith maybe led him astray. He broke his own safety.
Tragically, yes. The man who followed meticulous NASA protocols to walk safely on the moon, on Ararat, driven by this conviction, he hiked off alone against his team's rules.
And got caught in a rock.
A severe one. He was terribly injured, cut from head to toe, as reports said. Lucky to survive.
He recovered, went back multiple times, didn't
he? He did, but always empty-handed. The mountain seemed to actively resist him. It defeated the man who'd walked on the moon.
The search really consumed his later years. How did he view it looking back?
He died in 1991 and apparently called the failed quest the great disappointment of his life.
And that famous quote,
"It was easier to walk on the moon," really sums up the immense challenge, the physical and perhaps spiritual struggle he faced on Ararat. Profound commitment, but the mountain held its secret.
Now, Irwin was focused on the main Mount Ararat prop, but the search took a detour, didn't it, to a different location nearby?
Right, because the Bible says mountains, plural, of Ararat. Explorer David Fassel championed the idea that the Ark might be in the surrounding range, not necessarily on the highest.
And this led to the Durupinar site. How was that found?
It gained fame in 1959. A Turkish Air Force pilot doing aerial surveys photographed this very unusual, strikingly boat-shaped mound.
Located where?
About 17 miles south of the main Ararat Peak. And the dimensions were tantalizingly close to the Bible's description of the Ark, roughly 300 cubits, which is about 450 feet long.
That got people excited. And it brought together Fasold and another key figure in Archaeology.
Ron Wyatt, a fascinating character.
Yeah.
An ex-nurse, devout Christian explorer, very influential in those circles. He teamed up with Fasold to investigate Durupinar.
And they came armed with some interesting technology.
Fasold certainly did. He used a device he called a molecular frequency generator.
Which sounds very high-tech. What was it really?
Critics basically called it a souped-up metal detector, or even pseudoscience, but Fasold claimed it could detect subsurface patterns, anomalies.
And he claimed to find
Patterns of iron beneath the surface of the mountain. Grid-like patterns, he said, consistent with the internal framing or ribs of a massive ship, matching the Drupanar site's shape and size.
iron. Okay, and they found other things in the area, too.
Yes. In the valley below the boat-shaped mound, they found these very large stone holes carved through the top,
Which they interpreted as
drogue stones or anchor stones. Similar stones were used by ancient ships for stability.
And some had carvings.
Wyatt highlighted stones with 8 cross-like carvings on them. He interpreted this symbolically. Noah, plus his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. 8 survivors.
So the shape, the dimensions, the iron patterns, the anchor stones.
Yeah.
It seemed like a compelling package.
Hugely compelling to the public and the faith. And then came the drama.
The kidnapping.
Right. The area was and is politically volatile. Kurdish rebels, the PKK, operate there. Wyatt, Fasold, and their team were actually kidnapped and held hostage for 3 weeks.
Which must have been terrifying. But when they were released,
They returned to America, especially Christian America, as absolute heroes. They'd risked their lives for the Ark, martyrs for the cause.
and the Turkish government got involved.
Seeing the massive publicity and tourist potential, they actually designated Drupanar a national park and heritage site. It seemed like official confirmation.
The case seemed locked down, but then the actual scientists arrived. Geologists, archaeologists.
And the scientific assessment was swift and brutal.
What did the geologists say about the boat shape?
They determined it was a completely natural geological formation, specifically a syncline, a downward fold in the rock layer, likely formed by a mud flow wrapping around a harder outcrop of rhyolitic rock. Erosion did the rest.
So just rock and mud, not a wooden ship.
Definitely not a ship. And the anchor stones.
Turns out they were common throughout the region, likely pre-Christian pagan standing stones or cultic objects. The crosses were probably much older symbols, not related to Christianity or Noah.
And the iron, the core of Fasold's initial claim.
Yeah.
This became the biggest problem, didn't it? The Iron Age problem.
Yes, this was the scientific knockout blow for the Drupanar as
Explain that. Why is finding iron a problem?
Because Noah, if he existed according to biblical chronology, lived deep in the Bronze Age or even the late Neolithic or Copper Age. We're talking maybe 3000 or early.
And the Iron Age, when smelting iron became common practice in that part of the
Didn't really begin until around 1200 BC, much, much later. So what does that mean for building a massive boat like the Ark?
It means it absolutely would not have been built with iron fittings, iron nails, or an iron framework. Bronze Age shipbuilding used wood joinery, mortise, and tenon joints, wooden peg. That's it.
So if Fasold's machine did detect significant amounts of iron,
Then whatever it was detecting, it couldn't possibly be Noah's Ark from the Bronze Age. It would have to be something much later, or maybe just natural iron deposit or modern contaminant.
the presence of iron actually disproves the claim.
Exactly. It's a fundamental contradiction. Fasold himself eventually had to concede. He later admitted the Drupanar site was likely just a natural formation, geological lookalike, a red herring.
So Drupanar gets debunked scientifically, but the search for the Ark doesn't stop there, does it? People just went back to focusing on the main peak.
Pretty much. Veteran explorers like Richard Bright, for instance, he always thought Drupanar was a distraction. He believes the real Ark, if it exists, is still up there, high on Mount Ararat proper, probably encased in ice.
And Bright's credentials, he's serious about this.
Well, very. He's a pilot. Climbed Ararat more than 20 times, survived incredible dangers up there, nearly hit by mortars during conflicts, dodged falling boulders, endured extreme weather.
What keeps him going back?
Deep faith, clearly. He credits God with his survival on the mountain, but also some intriguing technical clues emerged.
Like what?
Declassified U.S. spy plane photographs from decades ago, and then newer satellite imagery from around 2003. These images appear to show something anomalous and unidentified shape high on Ararat's northern slope.
An unnatural structure.
Some analysts described it that way, maybe resembling the prow of a huge vessel partially buried in a glacier. That really fueled new hope for explorers like Bright.
And this leads us to perhaps the most controversial modern claim, the NAMI group from Hong Kong.
Yes, Noah's Ark Ministries International. Big headlines around 2007 and especially 2010.
What did they claim to have found?
Initially, they announced finding 4,800-year-old petrified wood high on the mountain, which was later disputed, likely just volcanic rock. But then came the bombshell.
They claimed they'd actually found and filmed inside a wooden structure.
Yeah, deep inside a glacial gully. They released video footage allegedly showing compartments made of ancient wood. They declared they were 99.9% certain they had found Noah's Ark.
The media went wild, obviously, but the scientific community reacted very differently.
With extreme skepticism bordering on outright disbelief.
Why? What was the main problem?
The NAMI team absolutely refused to reveal the precise location of their find. No GPS coordinates. They wouldn't allow independent researchers access to the site.
And no samples for testing, no peer-reviewed papers?
Nothing. No verifiable data, no scientific articles backing their claims. It looked like exploration driven purely by faith and media announcement, completely bypassing the scientific process.
Accusations flew around, didn't they, about maybe planting wood or faking the site?
Yes. Without transparency and independent verification, those suspicions were inevitable. The claim pretty much collapsed under scientific scrutiny, or the lack thereof.
So where does the Ark search stand today? Does it continue?
Oh, absolutely. The lure is too strong. It continues, often funded by evangelical groups, still relying heavily on local Kurdish guides.
For whom these expeditions mean income.
Definitely. It's a complex mix of genuine faith, the allure of legendary discovery, and real-world economics for the people living around Ararat.
And Richard Bright is still involved, teaming up with academics now.
Yes. He's partnered more recently with Randall Price, who is a respected professor specializing in Judaic studies and archaeology.
Trying to combine the explorer's passion with academic rigor, a dream team.
That seems to be the hope, that a more careful, scientifically grounded approach might finally succeed where past efforts, perhaps driven more purely by faith or sensation, have failed.
The drive to physically prove the Bible relent even against such odds. Okay, let's shift location dramatically.
From icy mountain peaks
to the potential source of legendary well. We're moving from Noah's Ark to the quest for King Solomon's mines.
King Solomon. His name is practically synonymous with wisdom, yes, but also incredible wealth. Gold, silver, ivory, a peacock.
Supplied, according to the Bible, by ships arriving every 3 years from this mysterious land called Ophir, sometimes also linked with Tarshish.
Right, and pinning down the actual location of Ophir became this great obsession for explorers, stretching over centuries.
Where did the search really kick off?
It got serious traction in the 16th century. Portuguese explorers sailing down the eastern coast of Africa found an established port town
called Sofala in modern Mozambique.
Exactly. And purely based on the sound of the name Sofala, it sounds a bit like Sofer, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Ophir. They jumped to a conclusion.
They thought, this is it. We found Solomon's port.
Pretty much. This linguistic link, however tenuous, planted this powerful idea in European minds. Solomon's gold came from southern Africa. Biblical history was just lying there, waiting to be rediscovered.
And this idea obsessed one explorer in particular in the 19th century, Karl Mau.
The German explorer. He was driven by this desire to fill in the blank spaces on the map of Africa, but also deeply inspired by that Sofala-Ophir connection. He believed he could find biblical sites.
And his preparation was intense, wasn't it? He wasn't just an adventurer.
No, he was incredibly methodical, almost zealous in his preparation. He didn't have a formal university education in exploration or science.
So he taught himself.
For 11 years, from roughly 1852 to 1863. He taught himself languages, English, French, Arabic, Latin. He studied chemistry, medicine, geology, astronomy, everything he thought he'd need.
And the physical training
was brutal, deliberately extreme. He practiced enduring starvation, long forced marches with minimal food and water, trying to physically condition himself for the hardships he knew he'd face in the African interior. This guy.
When did he finally set out?
1865. And it was years of hardship, starvation, illness, near failure. But in 1867, he made a break.
He found gold.
Significant gold fields in the Taki region, right near the border of modern Botswana and Zimbabwe.
And he immediately sent word back to Europe,
where the connection was instantly made. Mau finds gold in Ophir. European magazines ran with it. It helped spark one of the first gold rushes in southern Africa.
But gold fields weren't enough. He needed the city, right? Solomon's base.
Exactly. He needed the ruin. He heard rumors from locals about a magnificent abandoned city, stone walls.
And in 1871, he found it.
He found the incredible ruins of Great Zimbabwe. And he immediately noticed a key architectural feature.
The wall. Massive curved walls made of carefully cut granite blocks,
but built without any mortar holding them together. Dry stone construction.
And that detail clicked with the old Portuguese accounts and with Mau's own theories.
It did, but it also led him down a path heavily influenced by the colonial biases of his time. Mau, like many Europeans then, simply couldn't believe that indigenous Africans were capable of building something so sophisticated, so monumental. It didn't fit their narrative of uncivilized Africa.
So if Africans didn't build it, who did? In his mind,
he concluded, white people must have built. And the non-mortared stone technique. He linked that to building styles known from the ancient Mediterranean, specifically the Phoenicians.
Why?
Because they were renowned ancient traders, seafarers, known to have sailed far and wide, even potentially around Africa. They predated the Greeks and Romans and built impressive stone structures. And crucially, they were contemporaries and allies of King Solomon, according to the Bible.
Okay, so he's got the location, Ophir Sofala, the wealth, gold, the builders, Phoenicians allied with Solomon. He needs one more link to Solomon's temple itself.
the cedar clip. He examined wooden lintels, crossbeams found within the ruins.
Then did what? Compared them to his pencil.
Literally. He compared splinters from the ancient beams to the wood of his own cedar pencil, probably assuming it was Lebanese cedar, and decided they matched.
A huge leap of faith, scientific.
Massive. But for Mao, it sealed the deal. Solomon's temple in Jerusalem was famously built with cedar imported from Lebanon. Finding cedar here confirmed the Solomon connection.
So his grand theory was
that the Phoenicians, working for King Solomon, built Great Zimbabwe as a palace or temple, maybe for the Queen of Sheba, here in Ofosafla. They used the biblically prescribed cedar wood and managed the gold trade from here.
And this theory exploded onto the world stage.
Absolutely. Mao's discovery, framed this way, was huge news, and it directly inspired the English author H. Rider Haggard
to write King Solomon's Mines in 1885,
which became a massive bestseller. An adventure class. That title cemented Great Zimbabwe in the popular imagination, forever linking it to Solomon's mythical wealth, even though the link was based on Mao's flawed interpretation.
But the tragedy for Mao himself, despite this incredible discovery fame,
he died just a few years later, in 1875. Impoverished, sick, his academic contributions largely ignored or disputed at the time. Some suspect suicide. A really tragic end for such a driven explorer.
His story really captures that cost of obsessive quest. But his discovery, even if his conclusions were wrong, was fundamentally important. The academic reckoning.
Yes, in the early 20th century, professional archaeology started to replace amateur exploration. Proper scientific methods were applied.
Who led the charge in debunking Mao's theory?
David Randall McIver, a British archaeologist in 1905. He used a key dating technique for the time, examining the pottery found within the ruins.
What did the pottery reveal?
Two crucial things. First, McIver stated the pottery was unquestionably African in every detail. Completely indigenous, not imported Phoenician or Near Eastern styles.
And second, the date.
He dated the pottery, and therefore the main period of occupation in Great Zimbabwe, not to the 10th century BC, but to the medieval period, roughly the 14th century AD.
That's a 2,400-year difference, completely shattering the Solomon.
Totally. And McIver's findings were later confirmed and expanded upon by another pioneering archaeologist,
Gertrude Caton Thompson, in 1929.
Yes. She conducted further excavations, meticulously documenting the layers. She definitively confirmed McIver's medieval dating and the indigenous origin of the site. It was built by local Africans.
And she specifically addressed Mao's cedar claim, too, didn't she?
She did. She had the wood samples properly analyzed. Turns out it wasn't Lebanese cedar at all. It was local African sandalwood.
So Mao's entire biblical framework for Great Zimbabwe completely collapsed under scientific scrutiny.
Completely. His conclusions about Solomon, Sheba, Phoenician cedar, all wrong.
But the irony is, his initial discovery, driven by that flawed belief, was still foundational.
Absolutely critical. While Mao misinterpreted what he found, the fact that he found Great Zimbabwe and brought it to world attention was monumental.
And its true significance is now understood.
Yes, Great Zimbabwe is now celebrated as one of sub-Saharan Africa's greatest pre-colonial achievements, a brilliant architectural and cultural site.
Built
the ancestors of the modern Shona people, flourishing between the 12th and 15th centuries AD. It wasn't some remote outpost for Solomon. It was the powerful capital of a sophisticated indigenous kingdom.
A major political and commercial center, trading gold and ivory across the Indian Ocean, maybe even reaching China.
Exactly. And the modern nation of Zimbabwe proudly took its name from the site. It shifted from being evidence for a foreign biblical story to being a symbol of African heritage achievement.
It's a fantastic example of how belief can drive discovery, but science ultimately reveals a different, perhaps even more important... Okay, let's circle back to the actual biblical kingdom of David and Solomon. Does archaeology support their...
That's been a huge debate for decades. Really, until the late 1980s, early 90s, there was almost zero external, not-biblical evidence mentioning King David or King Solomon.
So they were often treated as purely legendary figures by secular historians.
Largely, yes. Or perhaps wildly exaggerated figures based on minor tribal chieftains. The Grand Kingdom described in the Bible seemed archaeologically invisible.
But something changed in the 1990s.
A major discovery. The Tel Dan stele, an inscribed stone fragment found in northern Israel.
Dating from when?
Mid-9th century BC. About 150 years after David and Solomon supposedly lived.
And what did it say that was so important?
It was part of a victory monument erected by an Aramean king, boasting of his victories over the kingdoms of Israel and, crucially, the House of David.
The first known non-biblical reference to David's dynasty.
Exactly. It didn't prove all the biblical stories, but it confirmed that, by the 9th century BC, a neighboring kingdom recognized a ruling dynasty in Judah associated with the name David. It was huge.
It put David at least firmly into the historical record.
Yes, it fundamentally shifted the debate. Suddenly, the possibility of a real significant 10th century BC kingdom under David and Solomon was back on the table for serious archaeological discussion.
And what about Solomon's legendary wealth, those mines? If not gold in Zimbabwe, then what?
Well, recent archaeology points towards something maybe less glamorous, but potentially just as valuable in its time. Copper. Excavations at a site called Kirbat in Nahas, south of the Dead Sea in modern Jordan. The name literally means ruins of copper.
And what did they find there?
Evidence of truly industrial-scale copper production. Massive slag heap, remnants of furnaces, fortifications.
Dating to when?
Using radiocarbon dating on organic materials within the slag layer, they've dated the peak production period to the 10th and 9th centuries BC.
Exactly the time of Solomon, according to Biblical.
Precisely.
Copper isn't gold, but back then.
In the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age, copper was absolutely essential for tools, for weapons, for trade. Controlling large-scale copper production would have been a source of immense economic and strategic power.
So the new thinking is that maybe these were Solomon's mines, copper.
It provides a plausible, archaeologically supported economic basis for a powerful kingdom in the region during Solomon's time. It doesn't confirm the Queen of Sheba bringing tons of gold, but it suggests a real resource-based wealth.
A more realistic industrial foundation for the legend.
Awesome. The debate continues, but the copper findings have definitely added a strong piece of evidence supporting a historically significant Solomonic kingdom.
But the Queen of Sheba herself, still missing from the record.
Still entirely elusive. No archaeological or external textual evidence for her visit has ever been. She remains firmly in the realm of legend for now.
So across the request, Titulus, the Ark, the mine, incredible history up mountains, across continents.
Driven by this powerful desire to connect faith with physical reality.
And what strikes me, as you said about Great Zimbabwe, is how often the belief itself, even if the initial theory turns out wrong, is the engine for discovery. Mao was looking for Solomon, but he found something.
That's a fascinating recurrence. And the other common thread is that fundamental clash in approaches, in methodology.
You mean the faith-driven explorers versus the scientists?
Yeah. You see figures like Irwin, Wyatt, Mao, often amateurs, incredibly dedicated, but starting with a conclusion derived from their faith or reading of the Bible, and then searching, sometimes selectively, for evidence to confirm it.
Versus the scientific method,
which ideally demands reproducible data, objective analysis, peer review. Methods like carbon dating, careful excavation, stratigraphy, comparative paleography, they start with the evidence and build conclusions, even as conclusions contradict cherished beliefs or expectations.
It's that difference between trying to make the evidence fit the story
and letting the evidence tell its own story wherever it leads.
And for you, the listener, maybe reflecting on this, whether you approach these questions driven by faith or just pure historical curiosity or the thrill of adventure.
The pursuit itself tells us so much. Maybe less about whether a specific piece of wood or a giant boat actually existed exactly as described.
And more about human nature, about our need for connection to the past, the power of narrative, the enduring strength of conviction.
Definitely. Which brings us back to survival, maybe a final thought. We saw the Titulus wood potentially survived in a cistern.
And we know from archaeology, like Egyptian tombs, that certain woods, especially hard, dense woods like acacia, which was common in the Near East and specified for sacred objects in the Bible.
Acacia wood can survive for thousands of years in the right condition. Dry, stable, undisturbed.
We also know from places like Kirbat and Nahas that complex societies with significant resources existed in that region around the time the Ark of the Covenant.
So here's the provocative thought. If a simple, relatively small wooden sign like the Titulus could potentially survive being buried for centuries.
And if hard acacia wood is known to last for millennia in dry conditions, what about the real Ark of the Covenant?
Even the simpler version described in Deuteronomy, basically an acacia wood box overlaid with gold, is it totally impossible that it survived?
Not discovered through some grand, heavily publicized expedition on Mount Nebo or anything.
But maybe just lost. Buried deep in a forgotten chamber, a hidden tunnel system, perhaps somewhere under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem itself.
Just waiting undisturbed for centuries until maybe a random construction project or an archaeologist looking for something completely different accidentally stumbles upon.
Could the ultimate biblical relic still be out there, waiting not for a quest, but for sheer chance?
That's the kind of mystery that keeps the quest alive in one form or another. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.